I know it might seem like sometimes the messages that are being shared on this podcast can seem a little contradictory at times, but I actually see how it all fits together perfectly as puzzle pieces in a seamless congruency, actually, because it creates a wholeness that humanity hasn't adjusted to yet. But at first, there's going to be some mind expansion to conceive of what that wholeness really is and what that can feel like and look like. And I feel really excited about bringing you this particular episode because the work of today's guest, what he's doing in the world, I believe it has the power to transform the way that people engage sexually and even to transform the porn industry potentially as well. And Aaron in this episode shares two guided somatic practices, and I encourage you to actually embody it as you hear it if you're willing. And there's actually so much nuance in this episode. It's definitely one for the sex nerds, I would say. And Aaron has a really interesting academic background that's really intriguing, especially his master's degree, as well as being a really, really physically, energetically embodied man. And I want to mention that there was recently a trailer for this podcast that was added kind of recently. And it's like 2 minutes long. And so if you're new to this and you're hearing this episode for the first time and you don't quite get the context for what this whole project is, I encourage you to just at least listen to that really brief trailer because it will help you understand that what I mean in the use of the word patriarchy within this podcast, I'm not referring to a neutral perception of patriarchy where, men are in their leadership. Men being in their leadership is not a problem. What I'm referring to when I talk about patriarchal sex, or even just when I mention patriarchy, what I'm implying is the paradigm of it, meaning that there is an entire social context that leans to the man's favor in a way where the world, from a time rather, where the world was built for men to participate in and not women, where women were still subordinate and did not have social rights and were kept at home, almost like the man is a farmer and the woman is an animal or a resource, like the agricultural days that took over the goddess times. And while for many of us, at least listening to this podcast, that's for sure, are not dealing with the really, really extreme ways that patriarchy, in its most negative expression, is still embodied on the planet today. I actually heard a story. I saw a woman speaking on video about I believe it may have been India, I'm not sure, Pakistan, but she described seeing a video of a man carrying his wife's severed head around in his hand because apparently he thought that she might have looked at another man. That's a super extreme example of the most toxic version of patriarchy that we can imagine, right? And yet it's still very prevalent in the world today. I mean, the rate of femicide around the world, this is not something that can be faked. A woman is dead or she's alive. If the femicide statistics are outrageous on this planet that we're living on. And so this perception that, oh, women and feminists are just concerned about microaggressions. No, women are being killed every freaking day. And the paradigm of patriarchy, where the legal system, where every facet of society was slant, and yes, it's changing. And sometimes women abuse that, the social rights that we now have and the legal rights that we now have in some cases. But even with that going on, the majority of what is being experienced is still extremely demeaning of women and of the feminine. And that's a huge point of what this podcast is all about. It's actually about unearthing deep, profound respect for the feminine with a capital F, because within this paradigm of patriarchy, um, everyone loses, including men. And bringing it back to the patriarchal sex for a moment, I can see that this is something I need to speak about in quite a bit more detail on some solo episodes coming up, because when patriarchy, in the context that I'm using it here, is interpreted as just male leadership or male dominance, this is not taking into consideration the actual female experience of living in a world where there is an extreme need to be concerned about her safety. And the world is not a safe place to be, but there's a level of hypervigilance to that a woman lives with in the world today that wouldn't be the case if it were just understood that both man and woman um, are equally valid and equally meant to have the same social rights, very different beings with different strengths, but equal in our rights to autonomy, our rights to exist, my God, to exist. So I want to say a little something about this before this episode begins, in that the paradigm of patriarchal sex is an experience on the female side, talking from the female side for a moment, of already living every day of her life since a little girl, having constant impressions, imprints into her mind, into her body, into every facet of her being, growing up in a world where there is an abundance of entitlement on the side of the male. And obviously, not all men play that out in the same way, but I'm talking about the context of the culture of society. Some cultures are far worse than others with this, of course, but even in, um, say an average Western culture, it is very apparent. And when a woman is in a sexual situation with a man and he's coming at her with actually an extreme level of entitlement and pornographic programming and approaching her body in that way, if that's where he's at, which is the majority of guys, I don't think people have really taken the time to consider what that is like for a woman, where her most vulnerable, her most receptive, her most impressionable, and most physically vulnerable position she can possibly be in with a man is also dealing with such a physicalized version of the patriarchal context. And so male leadership is not being questioned here. And there's a moment when Aaron mentions, when we talk about dominance for a moment inside the episode, where he mentions like an advanced dancer, like a salsa or a tango dancer, where yes, the man may take the first step. He may be the one to officially lead. However, he gets that impulse in order to lead from subtle body shifts on behalf of the woman. And and then she responds to his step, her receptivity to his leadership, but his leadership is being gauged from an unspoken level of dialogue, of communication, from their connection without words. And this is how it really is meant to be in a most natural scenario, where a man is in his naturalness, a woman in her naturalness, or anyone that's coming together in a sexual situation, who are embodied, who are connected, self-respecting, mutually respecting. They intend for mutual pleasure. And that's the point of explaining this, because it's actually not how sex is typically happening. And so it's worthwhile to break this down. And to help me do that today is someone who I want to say is truly a sexual luminary, along with his partner, Saida Desilets. Aaron Michael has incredible wisdom to share with you in this episode. And he also has a program. Both he and Saida have a program beginning in January. And I'm going to include the links to that with this episode. And if you don't see it there right away, come back and check later because there will be a special link for this podcast that can give you entry into that. And it's especially for couples, and it's something that they have researched and documented the effectiveness of, and he will describe all of that to you. So, without having you wait any further, I'll finish with this foreplay for now so you can enjoy this incredible episode that I believe is one of the most important ones that will ever happen in terms of the very practical level of a solution to patriarchal sex, of an alternative, of really what it is to live in the beyond. Welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, where patriarchy is defined as a paradigm that both men and women uphold in different ways. Here you get to listen in on genuine conversations between leaders from around the world to discover more mutual respect and less division, as well as more pleasure and love in your life. My name is Devashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. So, welcome back, everyone. And I'm excited actually to have Aaron Michael here with me today. And I don't know if you've all seen his fantastic Instagram profile, which is Suction Sex, with such practical guidance, uh, basically of how to go beyond patriarchal sex in the way that I see it. And I look forward to hearing how you explain it, Aaron. So, thanks for coming on.
A pleasure to be here, Devoshi.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
love to hear a
And
little bit what you mean by patriarchal sex.
yeah, actually, before this began, my other title, which is very PC, was more like Love and Awakening. And then I thought, geez, that's so neutral. Like,
I like
and
it.
from actually doing this with this particular name, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, sure, it brings things up for people. But what
Mm,
I've noticed is that naming the paradigm that we're evolving out of, the conditioned programmed paradigm, has actually been very useful for people
mm,
because there's so many of us, like yourself and myself and Saida and so many other people that have been working in the space of the beyond for decades and
yes.
ones that have come before us, right? And yet, still, there's so many people who don't see why they would connect with that. So, there's something about offering the beyond and naming what we're moving away from that feels
Yes.
really important.
Mm, mm. I like that. And I understand the importance of what you're doing. I think the stories that come to my mind is, first of all, a lot of times when I hear patriarchal sex, I'm hearing a perspective that, for instance, especially penetrative sex is something that's for man's pleasure. And if you go to the therapeutic world, then you will hardly get any advice actually on how to have penetrative sex. In fact, a lot of times the recommendations is strictly more around no, a woman gets pleasured by oral sex, a woman gets pleasured by a vibrator. These are the ways that she is most likely to achieve orgasm. And then a lot of the field of not really traditional tantra, more neo-tantra, is based around a lot of, goddess worship and around the women's way. And when I see both women and men, even when they're wanting to then to have a common language around sex, it isn't there. And so for me, this mission and suction sex itself is bringing the focus just is really how mutual pleasure is created, and specifically that bodies complement one another, and that
Mm.
together they actually can even generate a greater synergy that I wouldn't say is more than one does on their own, but they're meant to come together in the same way that we're meant to live in communion with each other. And so the unlocking of not techniques, but a journey of self-discovery so that your own intuitive sexual self comes online. That's why suction sex is it's a method, and we can get into how I distinguish it from, other traditional lines and what the focus is on that. But just at the simplest form, though, your short podcast on somatic gnosis is exactly where suction sex came from, which is how do we make love to each other in a way that actually awakens a greater knowing of how to love ourselves and how to love each other? And that comes down to very precise ways of understanding our physiology. We've been taught a system of reproduction when it comes to anatomy. I am teaching a system of pleasure and how the body is designed and has an actual system of pleasure.
Yes. Yes. And if one had a look briefly at your profile on Instagram, it could seem like you're all about technique. And so I love hearing you go more broad here. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of your
Fantastic.
deeper understandings, that are on multiple levels of our being. And firstly, maybe how would you describe patriarchal sex if you were to have a definition of it?
I would not engage in those terms, but if I were to, though, then, like I said earlier, patriarchal sex, at least as it's being driven out and pushed out, is that it's sex that's centered around male pleasure. And that specifically sex centered around male pleasure as an antagonist or the opposite. No, I'd say not just the opposite, an antagonist, something that is against female pleasure. And how I would redefine patriarchal sex. Patriarchy simply means led by male. Like if you were to look at the Grecian families, this wasn't a charged word. It was that there was the head of the house was a man and he would lead. And so when I look at, for instance, studies on, there's a Bridget Freehart, her work speaking about biological synchronicity and attunement. When she's tracking the heartbeats and seeing how they start to align with each other, and that correlates with high sexual satisfaction, she's been noticing something very interesting that just barely the male heartbeat is the one that's setting that pace, and then the female heartbeat is leading, but not in a way that is forcing or dominating. But one of the things I speak about with suction sex is the reconceptualization of sex as not one directional, but bidirectional. And what I mean by that is that the receiving body, because frankly, it doesn't have to be a woman. I've worked with homosexual couples where you have a receiver, the person on the being entered side, or in this case, actually swallowing or engulfing to bring in like a mouth with one's orifice to be an active receiver. And that's just the most basic ways. And then the entering body being an adaptive giver, because you're not leading anyone or forcing anyone or conquering them with anything but their own pleasure, their own love. And then eventually what happens is that this either or that that you hear so much about as antagonism, actually that they meld into one, and the two bodies literally become one. And at that point, it's a bit like if you were to talk to a salsa dancer. At the beginning, they say, yeah, the male takes the first step and then there's the lead there. But when you talk to really high level salsa dancers, they'll say that you're in the dance and you're both co-creating something. And it is what I have found. I've worked with women that have had probably around 1,000 or so different hands-on sessions. I was working with a midwife out of Denmark for a very long time and was dealing with women that had trauma. But then eventually, once they were able to face the fears or their own pain and to release it, the thing that was most daunting to them actually was their own pleasure. And what they discovered, because my clients didn't come back to me, was that they, those sessions were about helping them learn how their own bodies worked in a way that was holistic, in a way that the whole system of the body has a very particular way of breathing and moving, which is just different than what popular culture would be having women do, which is Kegels and squeezing for pleasure. And yeah, like I said, there's a system to it. And
Mm.
so on the Instagram, you will see me speaking about things, but if you're a really good learner, you'll be watching Saida's body because that's what's doing most of the teaching there, because
Mm.
I'm attuning to her. And the beauty of our relationship, of our sex life, is the tremendous unleashing of life force that comes and ripples through her and that charges me and brings this wave of sensation. And it all comes from a deep place of listening. So to get back to
Yeah.
patriarchal sex, I enter into a deep state of listening to then lead and guide and bring her into deeper states of her pleasure that then bring me into deeper states of mine. And at one point, then there is no separation. So if patriarchal sex means that she likes that I take those first steps, and when I climb on top of her or behind her or on the side or make love to her, then I guess that would be patriarchal sex redefined in the way that it could be just
You mean
simply
you mean
led.
dominance in some moments like that?
I don't even mean, I mean, interesting. So sometimes dominance gets mistaken with domineering. I have a really good friend who's also a sex coach, Andrew Miach, and he distinguishes to guys. He's like, look, dominance is one thing, domineering is not it.
Of course,
So
of course. Yeah.
when we talk about dominance, it's not in the sense of me just having my way. I guess when I think of the word dominance, I think of more when I'm taking pleasure in the kind of more former way that Betty Martin would talk of taking, which is when you're doing an action for your own pleasure. But then there's a counterpart to that, which is a person is allowing, meaning they are they are doing something also for the giver's pleasure. So there needs to be a match there where things typically go off during a sexual experience is you have a man who thinks he's giving pleasure, doing something. And frankly, you know what? It's not just a man. When I've spoken to male homosexual couples, female homosexual couples,
Yes.
whenever engaging in the act of penetration, the one that is doing the penetrating, the orgasm gap isn't a heterosexual problem. It's a
Yes.
misunderstanding of penetrative sex.
Mm.
So when you have a person in that giving position and they think that they're giving, meaning that they're doing something for the other person's pleasure, they are actually taking because the other person maybe isn't in pleasure and then they're doing it for themselves. Meanwhile, the other person on the receiving side thinks that they are receiving, which is that, oh, this is being done for my pleasure, supposedly. But in truth, they're allowing the person to do what they're doing. And they're hoping, and their greatest pleasure is hopefully that they're getting pleasure. So you can see where the wires get crossed.
Yes.
And that is where then I see quote unquote patriarchal sex. But what I see as a coach is you have two people that are ignorant to the ways of their own body. And
Yes.
when that ignorance is removed and they start to learn how their systems operate as mutual systems of pleasure, then all these words get thrown out of there and they're not doing techniques, they're not trying to do what I'm showing them on suction sex. Like they simply start to tune in. So I'm giving more tools if you were to really listen to what I'm teaching. So that way people understand, oh, okay, I know now how the bicycle works, how to hold my balance, etc., and how that mechanism, biomechanics of sex works in a way that is actually healthy for my tissues, healthy for my nervous system. A different conceptualization, a different way of feeling through the sexual experience so that women can be active in seeking out what it is that they have so that they have agency. And then a man or a person on the giving side also has the ability to better read and see what the person is desiring, not just from words. We think of consent as something that we speak out loud, as opposed to something that we feel through our bodies.
Yes, yes. And part of this more evolutionary experience of a man listening through
Hmm.
penetration implies, a level of receptivity, which is in connection with his inner feminine or his, broader range beyond a typical patriarchal programming. And I want to speak the difference of a patriarch or patriarchy in the neutral sense into the paradigm, which has a lot of expectation and assumption of how to be. And that's what I'm talking about in the use of the
Hmm.
word patriarchy. And certainly, it's been really helpful for women to grasp this term and how they contribute to it, because a lot of women are just going along with that paradigm, having no idea that they could be having a different experience. They literally think that's just what sex is.
Hmm.
So it's not like they're, blaming the man and whatever. They literally don't even know their own bodies and their own energy to be able to have a different experience. So
Yes.
truly, men, women, whoever are co-creating that paradigm and holding it in place. And
Yes.
the broadening of individual range to be able to have a more holistic experience is something that takes quite a bit of emotional, psychological, energetic inner journeying. It's in the process of embodiment, basically.
I mean, when you really start to connect, especially from, we'll use a heterosexual example, but the connection of the cervix to the head of the penis, there is a penetration that happens from the cervix through the head of the penis that is an intense sensation. It can
Mm.
feel like electricity and intense amounts of heat. So there's this bidirectional penetration that's even
Yes,
happening, which is beyond what I was speaking about before, where the person on the receiving side is pulling them in
yes.
with their pelvic floor muscles. But yes, this ability to listen. I was working with men, for instance, in Latin America, as well as women. It was Latin culture, it was in Spain. And hearing these men, and these would be the typical definition of toxic masculinity. They were prisoners in a maximum security prison.
Oh, wow.
And they were telling me about when they would open up, and a lot of them would cry and admit to me because they were held away from their loved ones, that part of their frustration was that if they didn't show a front of knowing what to do in bed, then the women would dismiss them.
Mm.
And at the same time, though, the women that they're with didn't necessarily know their own bodies to guide them where to go. And so they would adopt this bravado to get a woman in, but then admit that when it came down down to it, they didn't really know what to do beyond, what they had probably seen predominantly in porn, but they were
Yes.
hungry, like to the point of almost as if it was their greatest life purpose to serve their woman and to serve their woman with raising their child and to simply not knowing how. And when I speak to women, there's this tremendous desire to, because they would come and they would visit the prison and they would have this tremendous desire to please their man to the point of they would get different surgeries to tighten their vagina because they were told this is how, a tight vagina is a good vagina.
Yeah.
And what would end up happening is that they would kind of be curling up in pain and bearing
Pain.
through a sexual experience while the guy thought that he was best serving her by using a lot of friction, going harder and faster. And so when you say the words patriarchal sex, especially from the pejorative form, then I mean just listen to any type of like pop rap music and the terminology that they use, or if you even go to I had a friend telling me about it at a barber shop and he just kind of asked me, he's like, you all think that you want to beat up a pussy, but why do you do that? And then they sat and paused and they all were like, I think you're onto something. Why do I want to do that? And then one of the guys like, I actually don't even feel anything. I don't like doing it that way. I mean, but there's this idea that that's how he's supposed to, and then the
Yeah.
woman thinks that you have this gestalt, this this concept of penetrative sex, and this is precisely why I focus on penetrative sex because there is an art form there, and if I could have any
Yes.
gift to give to the world, it would be for each person to be able to feel with their genitals like fingers and see with their genitals like eyes.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. And excuse the pun, but for a lot of men in that particular programming of patriarchal sex, it's like this impenetrable certainty, not wanting to admit that there's a need to be curious, a desire to be curious of what else is possible, and thinking that if they already know and have that performative, make it look like they already know, then they're being the man.
I mean, it's interesting because I've been active in martial arts, and if you speak to these men around, for instance, the art of war and fighting, they don't just come in with a series of, well, these are the techniques, and I just apply them in my opponents to know this is how it goes. No, they are feeling out their opponent. They're getting a rhythm between them. Well, wouldn't that apply in the exact same way to making love, to being sexual? Like,
Mm.
I literally just last night was at a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class. Hadn't done that before, and at the end, I told the guys, "Well, I'm going back to my kind of wrestling tonight," and but there's a these guys aren't there to like hurt or break each other. They're rolling and feeling, and there's a flow that happens, and that for some reason has never really been brought out in sex. I haven't found forms of lovemaking that really do that. A lot of times, it to me felt like church tells you what not to do in terms of morals.
Yeah,
Regular sexual education teaches you how to avoid STIs and getting pregnant prematurely.
yeah,
Tantra teaches a lot of the things, well, Neo Tantra teaches a lot of the things before going into a sexual experience, maybe some bits of breathing and eye contact, but there's nothing really around, well, what are the actual body mechanics? And guys a lot of times are asking me about how can they have stronger erections, come more, last longer, and women a lot of times are trying to navigate either some form of pain, some sort of numbness, or how to pleasure their partner. And it's all built off of this construct of, well, how can we give more pleasure to the other person? And what I'm trying to teach people is how they can increase their capacity to actually have more pleasure, to contain more pleasure. And there's a lot of things that we do that almost systematically shut down our system of pleasure. And I'm not
Mm.
just talking on a psychological level. There is definitely that a lack of understanding mental arousal. I'd be very happy to speak with you around that. But there's also a biomechanic, physiological way that our pelvic floor, our breath, and our nervous system can very quickly start to experience and expand into parasympathetic states and predominantly parasympathetic states. But it's not just one or the other. There's this dance that happens between the two.
Yes.
And when you start making love from this place, you are literally making love.
Yes.
You had mentioned not wanting to bypass different parts of the human psychology and experience in your beautiful 15 minute. I mean, I really encourage you when listening to this to you've had amazing guests. I listened to that, but that 15-minute piece on the somatic gnosis I thought was just phenomenal because when you come into contact with these parts of yourselves, there is a whole journey that happens in terms of being able to survive pain, survive trauma, but there's a whole other mirror opposite side when it comes to thriving. And so what I've noticed is that people, when they start to tap into these parts of their body and start to unlock specifically pleasure, as opposed to avoiding pain, the psychological shift happens from going from a place of being psychologically conditioned to avoid pain, the things that we don't want as our primary motivator, such as,
Yes.
well, why do most people do their job? They don't want to get evicted from their house. They want to not starve. They want to, not. When you start to actually condition yourself towards pleasure, what happens is that you become positively conditioned. You start being motivated by the things that you want to achieve. But in that transition, there is where a lot of times a whole other level of fear and anxiety come up, a place of pain and anger. And you'll notice I'm using both the emotional and physical component because it is a psychosomatic experience, which is
Mm.
another word that sometimes certain circles don't really like.
Yeah.
But you also have blame, shame, and disgust kind of grouped together. And then you have what typically most people don't realize is that boredom and numbness. This is those two pair up. And so how does one then transition from boredom and numbness into curiosity and novelty, changing
Mm.
fear and anxiety into relaxation and calmness, and how anger and pain get transformed into joy and bliss, and then disgust and shame and blame get turned into closeness, intimacy, communication, and unity. And so this
Beautiful.
journey isn't a linear one, it's one of a cycle. So you are either cycling down into more pain until you reach a tipping point, and then that's where I then see trauma becomes pervasive, or you then start to come out of that, and then you start to cycle up until all of a sudden it reaches another tipping point that then cycles and opens you into a place of pleasure. And most people, when they face their pleasure, they become most terrified because they have to think, am I worthy? Can I trust it? And wow, who am I? And what happens if I become all of that? And they get almost afraid of their true human potential.
Mm. That's a very exciting place. And this moving towards or moving away um, is such a psychological and somatic reset. I mean, it's a new nervous system foundation
Yes.
to come from in life. And I was just talking to a woman today that's all about ecstatic birth and how coming
Mm.
in with that imprint changes and, the natural orientation to pleasure rather than moving away from pain and trying to do all the breath work to combat the amount of trauma that's built up. Like that's not even needed for that particular human being anymore. And we can do what we can to bring ourselves living in that way. And I appreciate what you said before too about it's not just a parasympathetic zone to connect in lovemaking, because I have noticed a few tantric lovemaking teachers really hone in on that. But again, we want the full range, right?
It's the new buzzword right now. I mean, now the word attunement is also being used a little bit more than presence, and embodiment, was then the word before that. This is, I have very different academic background that taught me about these things, especially the word embodiment. But
Mm. What is
even
your
with the parasite,
academic background?
my academic background is in cognitive semiotics. So I was a linguist. I did my bachelor's, and I actually was studying for my honors thesis for on the bachelor's level. I was looking at the different ways language is used to engage and create coercive persuasion, which is the
Wow.
form that then was called prior thought reform and before that brainwashing. And so, how does one create essentially circles of fear? And so then I was like, okay, I've looked at that enough. I then took a couple of years where I was a social coach teaching men and women that had difficulties in the dating arena and how to meet people of the opposite sex. And what I was noticing was that people might be able to then communicate and speak, but then they didn't know what to do when they got to the bedroom.
Hmm.
And then I went in Denmark. I studied my master's at Aarhus University, and I was studying cognitive semiotics, and it's cognitive sciences, an understanding of how the brain interprets meaning. And so I was looking at, for instance, the language philosopher Wertheimer, who actually came up with the term Gestalt. And he was, at that time, psychology was all about, action reaction times. But he started to say that we have to go beyond that because, and he coined the Gestalt saying that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So if you've ever seen those kind of drawings that have different colors, looks a little bit like a dartboard, and you stare at them, you'll see motion that happens, even though
Yes.
there's nothing actually moving.
Yes.
He's looking at these holistic experiences of the brain interpreting meaning from it, and then that's progressed. And so I did my master's on how does the brain interpret love, which then made me look at, well, what is lust? How does the brain interpret love in terms of lust, love in terms of romance, love in terms of long-term attachment? And so I was looking at attachment theory and going into that there's a completely different language. And a lot of times attachment will theories will say you have avoidant attachment, which is, negative. You have anxious attachment, which is negative, and then you have secure attachment. And ironically, out of the 1,000 papers that I read, there was hardly any actually on secure attachment. It was always the other poles of, avoidant and
Yes. Isn't
anxious.
there? Yes.
And so the way that I came to look at it was like, no, there needs to be a dynamic understanding because we naturally engage in what could be considered a little bit more of the avoidant behavior when we're flirting, when we're first meeting someone, we're engaging in a lustful act. And a lot of times why relationships will stale out is because they lose that part. And so when I look at a
Mm.
relationship, and even when I look at the quote unquote anxious, where you are continually thinking about the other person and wondering, like, is this like, who are they to me? Are they going to leave me? Are they going to stay with me? This is also a natural cycle that we go through when we have romantic feelings. So there's different words for these things that can either pathologize them or you can see in a healthy relationship. Steinberg talks about a triangle of needing romance, needing some lust, needing then what he'll consider more of like a friendship or a commitment there. But to have it and be in the center of that triangle doesn't mean that then you're just stuck there like a Zen monk, or at least the kind of popularized where you just have absent of everything. It's no, you're actually dancing and flowing between all three of these places in a way that then there is such a thing as long-term romance, long-term lust, which most people think only happens for, a maximum of 6 to 9 months due to, the drops in serotonin levels, et cetera, in the brain, where instead I found it was three papers out of all these thousand that spoke about long-term romance. And first of all, the couples were like, yeah, I'm glad that this long-term romance feels different than the first phase of romance because that was exhausting. They're like, we couldn't go on like that. The brain that's meant to, really have us hyper focus on one person, and you can use an evolutionary perspective to say this is so that we can, raise offspring together or create them. But they were saying that in long-term romance, that there was a more tranquility there. And the common piece that they continually found was that they had shared hobbies and that they played together. And then curiosity would naturally come out about each other, but it was always by doing something differently. And for me, I was like, well, can't the shared hobby and the pace to play be sex?
Why not?
I mean, you really start to, when you engage in this level of sexual interaction, some people go, well, aren't you afraid that someone will misuse it? That, kind of like seduction. The thing
Right.
is that this way of making sex, because you don't have a person that's just passive and a person that's just, quote unquote, domineering,
Hmm.
you are having agency in it. So you are no longer on the receiving side waiting for Prince or Princess Charming to come along and save you and make everything right, but instead you're an active participant in that. There's a feeling out of the other person, and there's a power that you encounter and bring yourself to the plate. My partner, Dr. Saida, talks about this concept of a beggar's bowl. He said, we don't come to the bedroom with a beggar's bowl, but a gourmet platter. And this exactly, when you approach sex from that place, you aren't in a, you have an agency to discern, but then also the one on the quote unquote giving side, it is opening your heart. When you get to this way of interacting with the body doesn't really have too much of an option not to open. And so as you feel into the beauty of someone unfolding their petals for you, you are brought in like bee to the honey, bee to the pollen, and it actually we have a part on the relationship coaching side, which we talk about as relational patterning, because it's not just a repatterning. For so many of us, we actually need to pattern, and that comes from having worked with people that have trauma that are prelingual trauma. Typically, a therapist will say, if you have prelingual trauma, there's nothing that can be repatterned because it was never set in place. But by embodying love in this way, you actually start to lay out the pattern that aligns with the body's coding of pleasure that then changes and brings you into a more secure attachment and and the bridge really is the intimacy. And by that, I have a very specific way of speaking of how do we embody consent. And there's a whole learning system
Mm.
around that, but it's essentially teaching people to feel their yes, no, and feel through their maybe, as opposed to the consent conversation beforehand, which of course have it and have it after, but have it with your body during.
Somatic consent all the way through. This is a big focus in the Tigress Path,
I love
helping
it.
women
Tell me.
feel, yeah, helping women feel equipped with that really embodied autonomy,
Mm,
and in a simplistic sense, if you were a yes at some point or at the beginning and that becomes a no, there has to be expression, communication around that.
Yes.
And then, how can we say what we really want to say with our whole body if possible?
And I can tell you that when you can feel your partner's yes, you'll never want to overpower them through a no, just because it's
Yes.
so much more exquisite. I mean, there's just no comparison. I mean,
Yes.
it's such a beautiful thing. Now, are your listeners maybe up for a little practice, something that they could have a take home? You said most of your listeners
Sure.
are women, but there's going to
Yes.
be just as much for the men out there. Because when you start to embody consent, what happens is one, on a different level, this is something that you want. What it also does, though, is it sends a more clear signal to the other person to know what it is that you want so that they can respond. So when I look at intimacy, and we'll get into the practice in a second,
Hmm.
there is four phases I look of intimacy. So the root of intimacy is intimare, the Latin for to impress upon, to leave an impression. So the way that I teach intimacy isn't candle lights and roses. And I mean, there's an impression that happens there's an intimacy that happens in lust, there's an intimacy that happens in romance, there's an intimacy that happens in long-term committed relationship, sex as well, where you are making love to empower your plans as a unit, for instance. But some people call that maybe sacred sex. But the first piece is truth. Feeling your yes, no, feeling through your maybe, which then allows for responsibility, the ability to respond to that truth, which then, when that happens, you then establish trust. And this allows for you to enter into deeper states of celebration, which then brings more truth, more responsibility, more trust, more celebration. It works the exact same way as well when you realize I'm expressing my truth. This person isn't being responsible. I need to actually trust them not to be responsible as opposed to trying to change them. We don't go into places of celebration or it's very short-lived because it's more about the making up after things go wrong, or maybe we are reliving the abuse pattern where we're either taking on the mother's role with a very dominant man, or we're taking on the
Mm.
father's role when the partner doesn't meet us and is more like our mother who is getting abused, for instance. I mean, this is just a
Yeah.
very stereotypical example that I'm giving
Yes.
out. But this cycle of creating an impression upon each other, this is what I then have the piece of embodied consent as the first step. So if you're up to a little practice, we could do that and the listeners
Yes.
could join in.
And I just got to say, I love how you started there with truth because
Mm.
it's the ultimate aphrodisiac, the most enduring aphrodisiac. So that's your starting point. I love it.
To hear a person's truth when it goes beyond their words and the sounds that start to come out of a person's body, it's one of the things that I love about sex and being interacting with my partner this way, because there's a time where, and even this is when working with somatic touch, the the person's voice almost to them doesn't sound like their own because they're like, who is this voice that is moving through me when they come into touch with that more primal state and that kind of
Mm.
truth. And then when that's coordinated with the expressed body fully is such a powerful thing because it's as if all the clothes and the masks we wear fall off and we get to touch and feel and interact with the true essence of the other person across from us. So I'd love to
Mm.
give a tool for people to start to come
Please.
into that because this cycle of intimacy, truth, responsibility, trust, celebration, this isn't something that just happens between two people. It starts within ourselves. We have
Always.
to hear our own truth. We need to be responsible to it. Can we honor our own no? If we can't, our body's never going to ever truly be able to express its full yes until it knows its no will be heard from a partner, but also from ourselves. One of the greatest violators of our truth is ourself. And until we learn to listen to it, we can't be responsible. We can't trust ourselves. We can't truly celebrate ourselves. How can we expect someone else to then come in and fix that?
Yes.
So the
Actually,
first step then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Aaron.
Please.
Um, as a linguist, you'd probably notice how eros is another one of those words that's being
Yes.
adopted a lot more frequently. But I love it because it encompasses both love and pleasure. And
Mm,
it's a great word to describe, what we're already individually in relationship with. And if we stay loyal to that, if we're committed to that, like a primary partner is often how I describe it with the women,
I love
then,
that.
you know, it's like endless abundance comes when we're in that alignment.
I'm in Greece currently, where the word
Ah,
eros comes from, and you'll
yes.
literally hear the Greeks talk about the eros. Oh, the eros. Like grandmother's talking about a musical event that they heard, and they'll talk about the eros. It's
Oh,
literally life force that they're
yes.
speaking to. It's not a pornographic,
No.
erotic force in that sense, but it, however, is something that is a deeply felt state all the way down to the pussy and the testicles and vibrating throughout the body and all the way up through the head. And it's just, it literally is a life force in its most basic sense.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when you look at the nature on the mountains and you see the seasons, you see the eros.
Beautiful. Yes. I'm ready.
All right. So there's a series of practices that we will use to help people begin to come into touch with their embodied consent. And if I could just invite you for a second, it's not going to be a guided meditation, but I also invite the listeners to just take a moment and feel into your body and without words, how would you show your yes with your body? If you were to express that and allow yourself to move, so you had no words, how could I see what is your yes? Or if you're in front of a mirror, how would you show a yes? Okay, so take a moment and just allow your body to express that. Good. I don't know if those that are going to be listening to the podcast will get a chance to see this, but we won't stop there. We'll do a little review in a second. What if you were to now express your no? Now, what if you were to express a strong no? And now, what about a fuck yes? Beautiful. You can express this with different words depending off of whoever we might be working with. I'm feeling a bit playful, so I will choose the word fuck yes here, but it could be a heaven's yes or whatever else it might be. But eventually, well, first of all, I just want to ask, how would you describe the experiences in your body?
Distinctly different.
Hmm.
And so the first one, yes, It was like a melting into myself, deepening into my own
Mhm.
body, and being receptive, open, available at the same time.
Yes. And the no?
The no felt like a closing inward, contracting in towards center line.
Yes, exactly. And then the strong no.
The strong no was that with guarding around it. And I made very clear no eye contact with that as
Yes.
well.
And your heavens or fuck yes. I don't know. Are we allowed to use language like that on this
Yeah,
podcast?
you're free, you're free. I didn't go there as much as I did with the other ones with that one in that moment.
Yes.
Um, so when I just sense into it now, it's like the yes, but with an extra expansion of my field around my body at the same time.
May I reflect to what I saw?
Yeah. This message is for the ladies. If you want to fully get in touch with yourself and your body, enter the Tigress Path. Here you become an initiated woman living way beyond patriarchal sex, and also become a safe space for men to learn about patriarchy without the blame. Inside the Tigress Path, we have personal transformation and also professional accredited training options. The links to connect are below with this episode.
So when you went into the yes at the beginning, your body moved back slightly. Your shoulders just ever so slightly rolled back. Your chest just a little bit moved forwards, and your chin came up, and your neck was exposed. When I asked you for your no, your chin dipped down and took a little bit of an angle towards me.
Mm.
Your shoulders rolled in, and I love what you said about your center line. In the military, I went to military high school.
Oh,
Your
wow.
most vital points on the body is called your milk line. This is where you do not want to get hit because these are all the vital organs. You take a shot here that's going to lead to negative outcomes, let's say. Now, we will naturally protect or open from that place. So then, when we went to the strong no, your eyes turned black.
Mm.
And there was a coldness there, like, don't fuck with me, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And it felt cold. And whereas the no was a little bit like this, you had that energy, but then it just became very directed, like almost like a push. Whereas then the fuck yes, I could feel that you didn't fully express that with your body, but what happened was there was this spark in your eyes that just went twinkled for a second, and it was like, we're gonna not go farther down that path, but there you go. And
You know, I
I was like,
actually blocked it because I'd kind of lean into running energy with you, and I was like, no, don't do that.
but there was an initial like that happened, like a little like, and your eyes actually lit up again from being black, and it was that spark, that life force, that is Eros. And
Mm.
what I encourage is an even greater freedom for a person to fully allow their body to open and fully close and strong no, push someone away and yes, pull them in. When your
Yes.
body starts to express itself to that extent, when we get stuck in our head with which is what happens in the maybe, and we start to think, what should I do? What does society say that I'm supposed to, quote unquote, patriarchy, matriarchy, feminism, masculinism, whatever. I don't care about the terms. When we start to go into social conditioning of what we should do, to answer that maybe, and we get stuck in the mind loop of our head, which happens so much during sex, feel your way through it. Open your arms. Feel, does that feel true? Close your body off. Does that feel true? Does the person listen and respond to that yes and no? On the giving side, as an adaptive giver, how can you actually then read the person more accurately because they have fully expressed themselves? And now we start to create that bridge between the gnosis of sex versus getting a series of techniques in a way that starts to repattern and pattern ourselves into these more dynamic understandings of attachment and into healthy constructs of relating with one another because we have brought a language to our bodies in our most intimate and impressionable times, which is that opportunity to truly intimate, to leave an impression upon one's other's souls, because this moves beyond the body and the psychology and actually begins to unlock our spirit and goes into the spiritual.
Ah, that's so beautifully said. Is that what you meant by your definition of intimacy?
Yes, intimare,
Hmm.
to impress upon. That is literally the Latin word means to impress, meaning
Hmm.
to leave an impression. So when we are intimate with each other, we are leaving an impression on each other's psychology, body, spirit. Like embodiment means that the mind is embodied. There's no separation between psyche and body. That's a bit of a weird word for me when I hear people use the word mind, meaning the brain. The mind is embodiment. Mind is
Is
body
in the
and
whole
psyche
body.
together.
Yeah.
Exactly. And well, that the body is actually a thinking mechanism. So that again, so when I talk about embodied consent, I'm speaking about how do we use our body to gain more information and give more information for accurate communication, which then truly allows the theory of truth, responsibility, trust, celebration to really hone in on, can you do this when you're having a conversation with a person like we were? What's their body doing? Are they leaning in? Can you actually begin through limbic resonance, start to embody something differently that leaves an impression that actually opens them up as opposed to using pickup lines or trying to like use
Yes.
different types of strategies to change your man partner into, the guy that you want. But then it's the same thing that translates into the bedroom
Mm.
when then you start to also embody that, yes, this movement here corresponds with this particular way of breathing that I teach that allows for the cervix to lower. It's very similar to a Valsalva maneuver, which activates the vagus nerve and allows for the cervix to come out and actually meet the head of the cock. And then there's a communication and an energetic exchange that then sends ripples through the person's entire being. So that way, when you go into these heightened states of pleasure and you have transcendental, psychedelic like experiences that literally open up the heart. If you are avoidant by nature, it'll feel like the scar tissue has been removed and you are open bare, and it can be very scary. But from an anxious attachment person's state, when their heart is open that way, it feels like an open gashing wound that you say, please fix this, but don't touch it. Please fix it, but don't touch it. And now you
Mm.
start to have the gnosis that you spoke about, the somatic knowing of this is me actually opening my heart to
Mm.
somebody that has the opportunity to be responsible, to start to stitch together those wounds and create something that goes beyond that. And then that's when celebration goes, whoa, we're on the other side now of embracing our full potential. And we do it through the lovemaking, through the fucking, through the sex, and all of its various forms of expression. To then it just becomes a dance, whether you start off with people get told, oh, a woman is to surrender. Well, how do you surrender?
Right.
You just let go. There's so many words like this that just have are vacuous because
Mm.
how do we do it? Well, as an active receiver, you bring the person in, you start to actively learn how to open yourself, feeling, can this person actually handle this level of my truth? To then celebrate not just orgasm, but just the experience of your eros running through you, which then can lead to
Yes.
deeper and deeper orgasms as they start to penetrate and enter your psyche and actually start to remold the way that one's mental arousal landscape, where some people will think of, well, kink, is a way to deal with trauma. Well, yes, you could look at it that way, but you could also just simply see that we are now engaging on such a deep level of intimacy, leaving impressions, that the whole psyche attachment system, pleasure system begins to remold itself in alignment with your partner. And all of a sudden, sex has multiple intentions. It
Mm.
can deal with so many different, an array of different states that we're in and take us to whole new places. And now, as opposed to, well, sex has one very specific time that we do it, which is to get the guy off so that he can quit shoulder tapping me, four more, and I'll satisfy him, and, he'll do the thing that I then want, which is like a
Mm.
very small paradigm. And instead
Yes.
it becomes, oh, this is actually for me. This actually can remove the physical pain and tension that I have in my body, in my psyche, and then we can actually start to grow and create an energy that is sustained between lovemaking and fuels us to focus more in on each other, as opposed to just getting off and then not wanting to really engage with our partner because we've
Right.
scratched the itch. And now we start to align ourselves in the long-term commitment towards what are our common goals, what are our shared values, which is really what I teach with relationship coaching. But how do you align those values with shared pleasure, shared communication to create a synergy? And Dr. Saida and I, it's kind of hot actually when I call her Dr. Saida, but my partner, we and sometimes we'll laugh, but seriously as well, talk about a relationship as a creationship, because we are creating something together, and that could be a family, that could be, in our case, we're creating a paradigm shift. We want to make intimacy simple,
Mm.
so that, and the why is so that people can live more connected to themselves and each other. How we do that is by making intimacy simple. And what we're doing is we're changing the way the world makes love. And now you know that I mean that literally.
Yes. Yes. That was my sense of what you're about. And I just have loved hearing about it in more depth. And this really going into the meaning of the word intimacy and leaving impressions is so fantastic for the sense of responsibility that that evokes.
Yes.
And I'm imagining a man listening to this who's maybe taken in, well, maybe not listening to this, but the kind of men that are taking in a lot of information around, how to be in control, how to be powerful, how to be ultra masculine, and all of that. It's actually a limitation in terms of what you're talking about, to be fixated on that only, because this intimacy of those sensory somatic consent practices that you were just guiding, the felt sense of that is so erotic, even within my own system, right? And the subtlety of that erotic energy, like to be able to, I'm thinking of a man shifting from what a lot of men are being guided by out in the world at the moment to what you're saying, Aaron. And it's like, oh, the whole body mastery, the whole body, the whole being sense of mastery of all of your energies and the impact that you can have on someone else in a way that's truly life-giving, evolutionary. Like that's phenomenal.
And the sensation of feeling a person give themselves to you as opposed to forcing them is
Mm,
night and day. But I also like the
yes.
night, so it's just another, there is no separation. It's to feel that level of acceptance. I think even for, especially for men, they start to they start to feel themselves in ways that they've been rejected. So many men
Mm.
are learn to play the game because they probably at some way or another were a hopeless romantic and had their hearts broken and realized, oh, well, if I show my
Yes.
feelings too much, then I don't do this, so I'm going to do the game thing. And we're just talking about a whole other paradigm shift. And I get asked the question a lot by women. They go, that's really nice, Aaron, but where do I find other men out there that want to do this? And just this month, I was doing a some men's master classes for free, and half of the men that were there were sent by their female partners who like to watch the stuff that Dr. Saida and I put out on Instagram, and they were deeply there. They desired to serve and give pleasure to their partner. However, the men that came there of their own accord and who were single, when I did a survey of like, what are you here for? Are you wanting to deal with your own physical challenge, your own pleasure, a partner's physical challenge, or your partner's pleasure? 75% of them were there specifically to bring more pleasure to a female partner. And then when they chose multiple things, they also wanted to learn about their own pleasure. And to me, that means that they're desiring deeply to serve women, but do so in a way that isn't disconnected from them. You'd think a lot of guys are struggling with lasting longer, but there's also a lot of guys that struggle without being able to feel delayed ejaculation. But the key in both of those situations, it's that they're feeling too little and the ability to feel more and actually increase your capacity for pleasure. I define sexual maturity not in the reproductive sense that comes with puberty and some hairs and the ability to become pregnant or to impregnate. Sexual maturity, in the way that I look at it as a system of pleasure, is one's ability to give and receive pleasure in a way that is integrated and doesn't detract us from our life or distract us, but actually is, like you mentioned, the eros, the life force that brings creativity, energy to all aspects of one's life, whether it's the bedroom, the boardroom, family life, parenting, etc. And when I look at what destroys relationships, you'll typically hear it's finances, not having shared values, not having shared communication, and not having a good sex life. So
Yes.
when I talk about the quote unquote sexual revolution or evolution, what are we looking at? Well, imagine a society that is built on mutual pleasure, embodied communication, shared values. And that's what I specialize in. You can go to someone else for the finances. And if you bring all these things together, from here we have a societal shift. And you have a shift both in the society beyond the family unit, but within the family unit, when you have shared pleasure, values, communication with healthy finances, then you have children that are raised with love that's actually embodied, leaving healthy imprints from the beginning, from the very first sex, fuck, making love to, and all of those expressions in one, imprinted into their DNA, brought into that world, lived into that family. What would society be like as opposed to hearing TVs in the evening? You'd hear the sounds of making love. More people are comfortable with machine gun fire on TV than the
Yeah.
sounds of passion ringing through the mountains. But
Or
once our
the
nervous systems,
fake like high pitched sounds that women on movies make. It's not real. It's not the full woman sound. Yeah.
well, this is then why I find it so interesting in these sessions or when hearing people like go into these deeper states of love making, it's much deeper, it's much more primal. And so one of the one of the very basic tools as well is with voice and learning where does your voice resonate and giving a freedom to these deeper guttural sounds that then is different than the hey, oh,
Yeah.
hey. And they said it's oh, like, and then all of a sudden at one point it's like, boom, you can hear when the person's truth comes online because it's not something that sounds pretty, but it is the most beautiful sound you'll have ever heard
Right.
and felt because your voice is a vibration that creates impact and releases the tension in your own body and also then stimulates your partner's body. But again, as you said, it's that is one of the most challenging ones for people, tools to incorporate because we're so conditioned to kind of faking. Same thing with dirty talking. We typically will talk about, oh, I'm, wearing the leather suit or I'm, and they draw out these weird scenarios like, ah, that doesn't really quite fit there. It's like, well, tell me how you feel. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you
Mhm.
love. Tell me what you'd like more of. Like, and this type of form of actually bringing in our erotic talk, or even when we drop out of words and we start to use tones or formatives or the exact kind of musical term for it, where does that voice resonate in the body that you have? It becomes a natural part of the system and an
Yeah.
open expression
Yeah.
uh, for everything. So,
And in support of saying how, this is not just education that men need to have, like in the Tigress Path, it's sound, authentic sound and expression all the way down into our pelvic bowls, is a big part of the actual practice. And typically when women are coming for the first time and they've been used to, say, new age spirituality, like heart chakra up, they're all there like, I'm all about the divine feminine. I can't wait. And then we get into the real practice and the sounding, and they're like, you want me to do what? And they're freaked out. And so there's a lot for women in this as well to really establish themselves in this place of the beyond of
yeah.
patriarchal sex, which is directly about mutual pleasure, about, fully embodied authenticity and the true intimacy that gets to happen when both
Which,
people are willing to meet themselves and each other like that.
which when you state it this way, now all of a sudden the rather PC term love and awaken has a deep meaning though
Oh,
that can be
yeah, it
very much
does. It
missed because
does.
this is exactly what you're doing. You are
Yes.
awakening to your own truth, awakening to what love truly is in not as a feeling, but an act and a state of being. And
Yes.
I really, I would love to do a workshop with you at some point. I think it could be amazing to co-create some form of workshop. You, myself, Dr. Saida, I think it would be magnificent. It's
I'm
rare,
in.
frankly, that I meet people in this field that, yeah, you had me at somatic gnosis, so we'll just put it that way.
And honestly, your nuance and depth and subtlety and the cognitive understanding that you have around all of this is really extraordinary. So thank you for cultivating yourself into the man that you are. You are truly a leader in what you've opened up to. And so thank you for doing the work that you're doing in the world. I often say to women that are describing sexual experiences that are not what they want, and they term it as making love. And I'm like, how about we not associate those words anymore with
Mhm.
when it's not that? Because making love, oh my God,
Yeah.
embodying love, this is so profound. For those words to lose their meaning is so sad, you know?
We hear this love is the answer, love not war. Well, if love truly is the answer, then is not learning to make love the most crucial thing we could do as humans?
Yes. And you have something coming in the month of January, I believe. I'd love you to share about that.
I might even be talking a little bit about it before then, but
Okay.
we were hired by a doctor actually to build a medical protocol. And it was based off of already the existing technology that we have. And it's a derivative, actually, of what playfully we will call nine naughty nights, or when it's being brought out therapeutically as a protocol to others, nine dates. And so it was a 3-year process, actually, this study over 8 weeks, where we had these different small practices that you could start to instill into your lovemaking. Because she said, well, what do we focus on? I said, well, the piece that never gets advised on, and the piece that is typically said is, no, this is just for men and not for women, is penetration. Let's tackle the most difficult thing that we can. Let's actually look at the act of penetration. And so we had already
Mm.
built this class. She knew that it had worked beforehand. And so this course here that I'm speaking of is 9 dates. And we did it last year. We'll see if we do it again this year. But it's we did a live where couples would come on and they would implement just one small thing with each date, and they would start to experience sex in a whole other way that would awaken their bedroom IQ. This isn't one thing that's a technique. This is a tool in a toolbox. It is part of a system, a methodology. And so we laid out what is the essential, the basics of suction sex, not from a place of brain knowledge, but a place of, now I can start to feel my body, to communicate what it wants, to know what it wants, to understand how my body works as a system of pleasure in tandem with another person. And
Mm.
as couples start to do this together, the transformation that happens is so incredible. And the amount of fun that people start to discover when they begin to just simply explore, oh, these are the different options that I have out of there, and I can start to use and move. I'm already starting to move a little bit here on the camera there, and feel into these options and find where it is that I can be opened or open my partner. It's a beautiful, such a beautiful thing to start to see couples that have been together for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, I've had clients into their 80s. I've had clients, in their early 20s, and they start to rediscover themselves and rediscover their partner in ways that they haven't ever conceived of. And they're just like, wow, I can't believe this was there. And one of the big results of this study, and I can provide the link. Oh,
Great. That'd be great.
I can provide the link to this study to you, is that you will see that people actually started to break the routine of, they no longer had routine sex. Their frequency of sex went up. The frequency and power of female orgasm increased. Men started to double, triple their lasting time. Overall, the lovemaking experience went up about tenfold. And I mean, it's just the communication before, during, and after sex went up. Feelings of sexual satisfaction. I mean, just across the board, the statistics were almost hard to believe. And this
Wow.
was an 8-week clinically tested, IRB approved, peer-reviewed, published study of over 44 different couples that went
What
through
is
this.
IRB?
The internal review board, when you are
Okay.
doing a clinical study, you need to get it approved, that it's ethical, essentially.
Yeah.
And so there's certain standards, because you'll hear a lot of times like, oh, we've proven this, and then you'll hear that they did like a little case study, but like there's
Yes.
levels to this.
Yep.
And we want to take this even further. The next thing we to start to do is randomized client trials, RCTs. So that's where then you start to have bigger populations of one who doesn't do it versus one who does. This one was a study of everyone that went through, and they then used qualitative measures for where they ranked themselves and then where they ranked themselves after. Now, part of the difficulty with this, and this was interesting, is that we had to invent a slightly different scale, because most people will say, oh, yeah, I'm at a 4 or 5, like in terms of where I'm at sexually. But if you do that statistically and then later they go, I had no clue, they still
Mm.
can only mark themselves out of 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So we did a scale where they did the traditional one, 4 to 5, 0 to 5, 0 being like very bad, 5 being like it's amazing. And then when we had them fill out after, they would still then put like that 4 or 5 marker, but then we had a separate scale that would say if wherever you were at was 0, and then if it got worse would be a -7, and if it went up, you then had an increase to +7. That allowed for people to go, I had no clue what was actually possible. And so
Yes.
this idea, because I mean, a lot of the women would actually define themselves when I spoke to the doctor, she said they would talk about sex as good sex is sex that isn't painful.
Mm.
And guys kind of said, well, sex is just good. Well, when they started to
Yes.
rediscover each other like this, and what they you can encounter with just in 9 little dates, like the magic that starts to happen is beautiful because they start to actually embody love, and the tears and feelings that start to come through because there's a part of wanting to love someone's partner so much, but the way that it's physically expressed or being portrayed on TV or in pornography, the person's body knows that's not actually the expressing of
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
And then when they come into the touch, the gnosis somatically of doing it and becoming it, everything transforms. And there is a sensitivity and an energy that's like a magnet that forms between you and your partner. And this starts to lay out the foundations of why we build sexual charges, how that charge will actually align us together in a way that isn't, oh, we need to do the work. You hear this so much in our field
I
of do the
know.
work, which
Yeah.
is always, do the work to face the difficult things. Yes, absolutely. But there's a work around pleasure as well. And there is a work that we do that actually builds a positive charge. If all we're doing is always digging through the garbage, that's that's dealing with trying to transform ourselves into surviving. But if we want to go into thriving, we need to do that other work, which actually can be even more scary. And then you'll notice that these works coexist together, but no one's dealing with this aspect of the pleasure. So
Hmm.
it's only a portion of the cycle. And dealing with one's pain is, it's not living, it's surviving. To truly
Yes.
be alive, we need to come into touch with the eros in life and allow that not to just come into touch with it, but as a trusted compass towards what we desire, as well as a trusted compass of what the couple can bring, the partnership, ships, whatever way you bring
Yeah.
yourselves together can
Yeah.
start to orient towards that. And people begin to have this deep trust in themselves that truly ends the conversation of, you know, quote unquote patriarchy, but we're also not doing a counter hegemonist movement of just then swinging towards, oh, well, now it must be matriarchy. No, we're moving out of that box
Totally. I don't believe in
and
that at
we're,
all. Yeah.
but to
Um,
become that, that's where I see these couples when they start to truly, they begin to experience what it's like for two to become one. When you talk of
yes.
sacred sex, like they literally, you don't know where you end, where the other begins. And at this point, there's an energy that's flowing. The eros is flowing through you and it is guiding your bodies as one. And we move beyond this polarity between dualism and those are fancy
Yes.
worlds of non-dual states. And like, no, but they really actually fucking exist and you can exist them by fucking.
Totally. In the felt sense, it exists
Yes.
beyond the understanding. And so the magnetic sensation that you described before, hence suction sex, right?
Well, absolutely. There is, well, the thing here is you're orienting around the sensation of creating suction as opposed to friction. Friction is
Hmm.
one dimensional. It requires harder, bigger, faster for longer, whereas
Yep.
suction, do we have time to do another little experiment here?
Sure. Sure.
So, are your fingers clean enough to be brought to your mouth?
Maybe.
Well, whether you then participate or not is up to you. If you want to go wash your hands, we can always come back. But for the listeners, you can pause and try this on your own. But if you were to take your finger and you were to then place it in your mouth and then keep the lips not moving and start to move the finger in and out, and that's what you have to create sensation. So then you'd start, squeeze your lips tighter to create more sensation. Maybe insert three fingers now. How does that feel? Now, bring the finger in and start to suck on the finger. Try and increase that sensation of suction. Notice how the mouth, but the finger itself starts to move differently. So this way, again, you're not learning a technique, you're learning a somatic gnosis, a state of being guided off of a felt state of the sensation of creating suction. And just with that single shift and understanding that penetration is bidirectional, the other foundations that suction sex shifts happen automatically. There's a different biomechanics, which is involving the pelvic floor in coordination with the breath and the movement. And I don't mean this in the shallow way of like, oh, everyone does breath, voice, movement. Like, no, there's an actual way that we start to use the pelvic floor to open up our orifices and bring someone in and starting to even activate different areas that the cervix itself will start to dilate, that the guy's cock will start to regulate its arousal levels and even lose a little bit of the rigidity of the erection to then calibrate with the female partner. And it becomes in Danish, you saying "klog pik," a clever cock. Like it literally attunes to the other person and matches. So that way, then when the arousal levels rise and they go down, you start to trust your natural cycle of erection. The body mechanics as well deal with what I think is what plagues most women and is so underspoken about is female erectile dysfunction, which is that the whole CUV complex becomes engorged and charged. We have a foundational shift in the physiology as we move into a predominantly parasympathetic state of orgasm, supported with sympathetic spikes that allow for the dance but
Mm.
don't go into the crash of where prolactin then comes out after either both the standard refractory period when a
Yeah.
woman or a man have that, and then all of a sudden we actually do not want to have engage in intimacy. Dopamine levels drop, um, oxytocin levels stabilize out. We start to actually build a sexual charge, and we then start to have not just again the understanding, the conceptualization of sex being bidirectional, but the biomechanical, the physiological starts to shift. And then we also end up starting to have a sensational driven focus that allows us to not go into our heads because we're feeling with our bodies consistently to guide us. And then lastly, sex has a different intention, which isn't just to get off or to make someone else get off, but instead it becomes the tools that we spoke of earlier for developing that intimacy on so many different levels that it starts to align our values, better communication, better shared states of pleasure that then fuel us and energize us with eros to go out into the world and be the change that we truly are from the inside out. And now, when I say inside out, I'm not just speaking poetically. I'm
Yes.
also speaking literally, which is what's the beauty of the Gnostics. traditions are, is that it's normally infused in poetry, but then you start to realize the poetry is literally what it's saying, but you
It's
never know that
literal.
until you know it and precisely until you become it.
Mm, mm, mm. Yes, how wonderful. So I particularly love this 9 days being a relatively short time frame because I think a lot of people have the impression, oh, it's going to take years or a long time to learn these things. Actually, it's not because our bodies are already designed to have these experiences. It's just that if you're not tapped into it in that way, it won't be your experience. But as soon as you do, it doesn't have to take forever.
No. In fact, the greatest weakness of these programs is that people become satisfied with their level of success too quickly. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Normally, we have people that will get to the 3 dates and they're like, "Oh wow, this is amazing. This is something completely new and different." And then they just get satisfied with that because the bar of success is so low that they can't even imagine it going further, which is why
Mm.
I do bespoke coaching to help people have the feedback and accountability to go, yes, and you can go this much further, even in the men's ability to last longer by feeling more, which I call YAFAP, which is a joke on the whole NoFap thing, which is like, no, your solo sexual practice, and which you can do as well with a partner, is the training grounds for being able to, whether it's delayed ejaculation, feel more, or if it's premature ejaculation or shame or whatever they're dealing with, by feeling and learning to connect with yourselves. A lot of times, those guys in 3 days, 6 minutes of practice already are like, wow, I've had something so incredible. Like, and then they almost forget to continue on to the 21 days because they just can't imagine that there's like even more out there. And so, if anything, these results can come so quickly that that level of let's go even further is needed, which is why we created the Embodied Love University, because what people really need is that opportunity for community and a
Yeah.
group, a collective of people that speak, understand a higher like state of what our potential is because the bar is set so low with reproductive, you know, system medicine therapy, which is still the anatomy is understood from this system of reproduction. So if you can impregnate, get impregnated, survive your period. Like it doesn't bring into pleasure and what it actually is as just as crucial as proper diet, proper education, proper exercise. What is pleasure? And so we'll speak to like biohacking organizations about the important role of actually training our pleasure, adapting our nervous system to maintain and sustain higher states of pleasure in our body. And to truly get that, that does need to have this collective feel. So in that university, you have, we want to have beyond sexual literacy, sexual fluency as a human right. So we have a series,
Mm.
it's called the Foundational Videos, and it's a course on, again, biomechanics, embodied consent, on a whole understanding of just the pleasure anatomy and how it works as a breathing system that moves. Like, so we're not learning anatomy as something, a static map, but actually moves. What relaxed arousal is, and what to understand. We probably don't have time for it, but to go into what are the pieces of mental arousal as actually, well, what is the psychological mechanics of one's mental arousal? That isn't something you do, but an understanding of that energy that drives our mental arousal, and then how do we even expand that? All this is free. It's for people who just
Yeah.
put in your email, take a look at it. It's out there because we want to again change the way the world makes love by making intimacy simple so that we can live more connected to ourselves and together. And that's the purpose of the Embodied Love University. And there's I mean, like 60 hours worth of information with all the course creations of
Incredible.
myself and Saida, and then there's our podcast as well that they can people just listen to these different things, and then there's the professional side, which is my greatest hope, is that professionals such as yourself, myself, that we have a place to actually come together from a multidisciplinary approach that's sex positive, so that therapists, coaches, pelvic floor specialists, doctors, psychologists, politicians can all bounce ideas together, but also recommend each other from areas of expertise, knowing that a person who has a client history will be taken care of with the respect and understanding of the true sexual potential that's lying dormant inside each of us, or slightly awakened or fully awakened, but how do we exercise that in
Yeah.
community that isn't just the client side, but also the community, the professional side, and start to bridge that gap?
It's so beautiful. And when you talk about human rights from this evolutionary perspective, I'm just so happy to hear what you're focusing on because I'm aware of, and one might think it's straight out of the manosphere or something, but it's actually an academic level, a body of work around male sexual rights,
Mm.
but it's very distorted, Aaron. They're like, a man has a right to rape, and it's because of feminism that he doesn't have the right to rape. Like crazy stuff,
Yeah.
crazy stuff. So, for this alternative to be available, for people to know about this, and it's one of the objectives of this podcast platform is to, bring together different professionals and sharing ideas and letting everyone hear about that to know who's around and what are they sharing and how is it contrasting to some dominant narratives out there that aren't actually moving humanity forward. So,
Yes.
yeah, thank you so much for your time and energy. I absolutely love the sound of what you and Dr. Saida are creating.
Well, thank you for having me here. I think it's also just such a beautiful space to have a frank conversation around such a charged topic. And I really
Yeah.
think that you bring a lot of beauty by choosing the words that you do. So that way you're not just preaching to the choir, but you're
Mm,
actually bringing more people into the fold and allowing for a paradigm shift by moving where a word and language is at and evolving it into the potential of and possibility of what it can be.
that's it. Thank you for seeing that.
Thank you for being that.
And I will put the links of how to find you and what you have going on with this episode. And thank you, especially for embodying what it is that you're teaching and being that light for men and women, but particularly men in a time where it is so needed, really.
Well, I don't know if you can hear it, but there is a thunderstorm rolling in. And so when this conversation finishes up, I look forward to embodying it with my partner. Because there is such a charge right now in the atmosphere as the storm rolls in over the Mediterranean Sea. Mm.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we won't delay finishing then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Whenever I'm out socially and a friend asks, Devashi, how can I get my partner into this exploration about living beyond patriarchal sex? My answer is exactly what I've put down in the show notes for you with this episode. And if you are willing to be the spell breaker of your bloodline and have the uninhibited pulse of Eros guiding you through life, beyond the matrix into the fullness of your divine sovereignty, then keep tuning in to these weekly episodes and share it with your friends. And may we all be free from suffering.